And we are live. Good morning with Omowale Afrika. This morning, the question that I want to put on the table for all of us is, do Black children need Afrocentric education? I can see our banner needs changing here. But do Black children need Afrocentric education specifically to succeed and to become fully healthy citizens within the United States or global citizens within the world, just to be completely self-actualized in themselves? It's a provocative and important question that would have people argue from the left and the right and the up and the down of it. Probably most all landing, the answer would probably be no. For many people, many educators, many people within the system would say it's a nice to have. It would be important to teach children of themselves, about themselves, and connect them to African history, which is basically world history, which is basically human history. But there's not a big effort to ensure that Black children have access to Afrocentric education. I think mostly because its time has passed in the minds of a lot of people. They feel like that is something that was once something that we did, but wasn't essential. What is really essential is educating and preparing kids for the world that they're going to live in, which is assumed to be the so-called quote unquote real world, which is the one that we live in, which is the world of commerce and media and law and politics and government the way that it is currently set up. Omowale gave me kind of like insight quickly into an upcoming centennial that's going to be important for people as a marker to maybe reacquaint themselves with ideas that they lost and maybe lost to their own peril. One of the things that came out of that quick discussion was the Declaration of the Rights of the Negro Peoples of the World, which I haven't seen in years. I had forgot that this existed. But in it, there's a preamble, and then there is, how many points? There's 54 of them, and 2 of them have an express connection to education. In 22, it says, "We protest the system of education in any country where Negroes are denied the same privileges and advantages as other races." And number 30 is, "We demand the right of an unlimited and unprejudiced education for ourselves and our posterity forever." Both of those are loaded with lots of meaning. And if you think about the 12-point program of the Black Panther Party, it also called for education that taught students about themselves and knowledge of self. So that's the setup. I do want to ask, well, first of all, good morning, Omowale. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Brother Chris. Thank you for having me on the show.
I appreciate it, because we need some wise counsel on this particular issue, some wise and studied counsel. But I do want to ask the question that we start with, which is, do Black children need Afrocentric education to succeed in life? I know that's going to demand we come up with a definition for succeed. Like, okay, what we mean by succeed. But key to that question to me is, if it is necessary, and we know for a fact that it's not happening almost anywhere, not in numbers, not at scale, what does that mean for Black people to achieve power in the United States? So why don't we just start with the first question: do Black children need Afrocentric education to succeed?
I would say absolutely, and I would argue, again, as you've already stated, that we would absolutely need to define what we mean by succeed, right? What are the end goals of education, right? Every system, there's three parts. There's a 3-part process to every system. You have input, you have throughput, and you have output. Mm-hmm. So the input is your children, right? The throughput is the system that is meant to socialize them or prepare them for an eventuality, which becomes the output, right? Where they're fed into another system, that system being the economy. So when we look historically at Black people's role within this economy, our role has always just been the function of labor. We were brought to this world, right, to the western part of the planet, so to speak, right, for the express purposes of labor. So our development and our socialization has always been around labor, and that has not changed, right? At the end of the 19th century, where when folks convened what's referred to now as the Mohawk Conference, right? It was in 1890 called the Mohawk Conference on the Negro question. The question was around, how do we educate or miseducate rather this class of people in preparation for an industrialized society. So when we look, at what the whole focus of that particular conference was, it was we need to give these folks a Christian education because by and large, and this comes from the remarks of Rutherford B. Hayes at the beginning of the conference. He argues that by and large, most of the Black folks in this country are practicing what he referred to as pagan voodooism, right? So he argued that for the safety of the country, because we've seen what has happened in places like Haiti in 1804. So therefore, for the safety of the country, first and foremost, they need to be given an education in Christianity. These folks need to be Christianized. That's the first thing. The second thing is they need to be given an education in industry and thrift, right? So you see this a lot in the teachings of people like Booker T. Washington, right? So ultimately, the goal was to prepare Black people to be labor inputs into the new industrial economy, right? So that has always been the purpose of education for Black people, but for people by and large, especially for Black people, it has been to make them into inputs essentially that go into the economy. Now, what does that mean though for us as a people? As the economy changes, right? So when the economy goes from agricultural to industrial to now we're in this knowledge-based economy that's going to be largely driven by artificial intelligence and other means that require less and less human labor, then what does that mean for a superfluous population that is no longer needed for its labor? And back in 19, I believe it was in the 60s, an economist wrote an essay which ended up becoming a book called "Who Needs the Negro?" where it was asking this question about Negro labor and what this society is going to have to do with this surplus population of people, so to speak. And therefore, so you had white society asking the question on one side of the table, but on the other side of the table, you have Black society asking the question. So you had people like Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Kwame Ture. I'm sorry. Kwame Ture. I was going to say Kwame Nkrumah. I always get the two mixed up. They're all asking this question, and they are arguing that white society or society in general is headed to a place where Negro or Black labor is becoming less and less of a need. And as a result, the prevailing need of the society for us will be how do we do away with this population that is no longer wanted and quite frankly no longer needed. So the education that Black children right now are being given is education that is meaningless, right? Because the whole model of education is meant to prepare you for a role in the economy, prepare you for a role for labor. But if the future, right, for the society as a whole means that, there won't be much labor needed, which is why you have the so-called brightest minds in the economy arguing for universal basic income, because they're arguing that, hey, there's not going to be any jobs for people in the future. So we need to establish what they're referring to as like this freedom dividend, or which I call a slavery dividend, in order for future populations to survive. So if we're being honest, and we're looking at the this question in terms of the purpose of education, well, right now, again, the education that our children are receiving is irrelevant because it's based on a labor model, right, making them the supply for the labor market, but B, there's not going to be much of a labor market there in the future. So that's the first part of the question. But the second part is that we as Black people have always understood that our education has to be more than about us becoming a labor input into someone else's economy. Quite frankly, an economy that is based upon, our situation as a people globally being maintained in the condition that it is currently in. So folks like Dr. Amos Wilson, they would argue that our education needs to be revolutionary, right? Because it needs to be preparing us for a world where we are once again sovereign as a people, where we once again maintain and have control over our land and resources, but also control over our development, right, and our socialization as a people, right? So for that type of education, it can be no other type of education except for it being Afrocentric, because you're trying to educate African people. So therefore, that education has to be based on their values. It has to be based on their interests, their principles, and more importantly, their history. The education that we receive right now, it's based upon Europeans. It's based upon their history, their values, and ultimately what they desire for us to be, not what we desire for us to be. So I think that in that regard, right, I refer to it as education for self-determination. And the only
Mm-hmm.
thing that can be self-determining is you having a good knowledge of self and who you are, having the ability to connect that to your history and your ancestors. Because in European education, I mean, every class that I've ever been in, they always start us off with like, how this thing that we're learning was initially taught back in, ancient Greece. They always see when we talk about, the Pythagorean theorem, or, all these different concepts, they always take us back to one of their ancestors in ancient Greece who was the creator's so-called creator. We know that that's a problematized statement, but they always tie us into their history, and in that history we as Black people are always marginal. So Afrocentricity or Afrocentric theory is the thing that gives us, that control over the socialization and the development of our children, and preparation for a future, not as labor, but in preparation for a future where they are leaders and developers and creators of their own nation.
So if you're going to switch from the education that you get now as a Black child in the American public schools, and you say that it's actually it's just meant to actually prepare you for labor and for the labor force, which at some point you're going to become obsolete. As a matter of fact, unemployment is basically the definition of unemployment in a capitalist society is obsolete. And
Yeah.
being a human obsolete entity is basically what we mean when we say unemployment. But if that is the case, and I always like to count the number, we have 8 million Black children walking into public schools every day who are probably encountering a system that you say is preparing them for obsolescence. What's the conversion? What do you convert them to? What type of education do you convert them to prepare them for? And actually, let me change that. What do you convert to, and what are you preparing them for? That I don't want to use the word practical, but I mean, like, if you're preparing them for revolution, but you're not preparing them to be able to do the theorems that you said, and geometry and biology, and to know the world in that way, could that become another form of miseducating them? I think. I don't know. I don't know what's behind my questions. Basically, to say we know what we have now. What would we be converting them to? And if we're not preparing them for work and for labor and for the ability to earn an income and buy a house and have a life, what would we be educating them for?
Again, you're educating them for self-determination. You're educating them for self-preservation, right? Self-preservation is the first law of nature. And as far as we have been concerned as a people, we have not been concerned with our own preservation. Our thinking, whether consciously or subconsciously, has always been that the preservation of our being is going to be done by the people who care for us. Like in terms of like large matters of society, like Black people have never been much concern with them in terms of running, managing, controlling, building nation, right? Have always been, areas of statehood that Europeans have controlled. And in many ways, we've lived a life that has been, in many ways, really just like hand to mouth. And people like Marcus Garvey, when they came and they gave us a message, as a people. And in fact, one of his most important writings is a book called "Message to the People: The Course on African Philosophy." And what he's arguing for is very practical, right? Because feeding yourself, right, clothing yourself, protecting yourself, these are all very, very practical things. And what Garvey is essentially arguing is that uh, as Europeans, or the white race, so to speak, as they advance
people with a course on African philosophy.
I'm getting playback here. Okay, all right, cool, we're good. So he's arguing that as Europeans or white people, as they advance technologically, as they gain a sharper or a more complete understanding of the material world and how to dominate, control, and manipulate that particular material world, they're going to have less need for you as a people. So what Garvey says essentially is that at the point, and I'm trying to quote him here, he says that at the point where society, or where the white race, so to speak, reaches this point of technical mastery over the material world, that is the point where the question of Black eradication and or extermination will become a serious reality that we will have to contend with as a people. And he based this assessment based upon the history of Europeans and their connection with other population or other groups of people, and how they have eradicated them and or exterminated them at the point where they did not need them, or they could find another population to do what they were trying to force that group to do. Case in point, the natives of this particular land, when they were able to eradicate and completely exterminate them, there was another population that they could come in and enslave and force them to do the labor on this land. And if you look at Malcolm X's final speech, the speech that he gave literally a week before he was assassinated, within the last 10 words of that speech, or the last 10 sentences of that speech, he's telling Black people that if you don't believe me, he's saying that they're going to have the gas chambers ready in this country before you know it. And for me, when I look at, and we were just talking about this before we went live, just about this moment that we're in, and I was explaining that this moment is much more than COVID-19. When we look at the spreading fascism, the ultra nationalism, you see Black people being lynched over all around the country. You see the economic angst that has really taken place within white society, where they are concerned with how they're going to feed their children in the future, right? And what these changes in the economy mean. In that regard, everybody is getting, I don't want to say on code, but getting prepared, so to speak. And Black people are kind of like just drifting along, not considering what we too must do to prepare ourselves for this new norm that we're getting kind of a glimpse of right now, for this increased police state, for this ultra nationalism or new or neo fascism. Like, what does that mean for us as a people? And we truly are not, taking our cues from history, because if we were, I think that our actions and our behavior would be much different. So taking that back to your original question as to what does that mean for the 8 million children that you mentioned are currently in the school system. Well, I would again I would answer that question in this way. We talked about before we got online. We talked about how this particular system or education is not preparing us to overthrow or to uproot white supremacy or white savagery, whatever you choose to name it. But if you look at what that particular system is built on, it's built on conquest, right? Meaning, I come and conquer you, and my chief means of conquering you is by removing your control over the land that once fed you, that once housed you, that once clothed you, that once nourished you. Now, land is something that is essential for all people, which is why Malcolm X says that the basis of all revolution is land, right? Land is the basis of that thing. Now, if someone takes your land away from you, which is your primary means of survival on the planet, then you require a secondary means of survival. That secondary means of survival becomes selling yourself into the economy, right? Selling your labor into the economy that is built upon stealing your land for wages. But what happens when there's no longer a place for you in that particular economy? So that means you no longer have access to your primary source of survival, which was the land. And now you don't have access to the secondary source of survival, which was the labor that you were selling to the people who stole the land. Right. So these are also very practical questions, right? Because you look at that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That base need, like your ability just for clothing, for protection, for food. How are we going to answer those questions? It's not the higher order questions that you're referring to, like geometry and you mentioned a couple of other sciences and maths. Like those things are definitely needed. Because you need people to facilitate and to build up and maintain, manage the nation. But in the immediate, right, your immediate concerns are always going to be food, clothing, shelter, protection. Without that, you can't live on this planet, and that's something that is really in question for us as a people.
It feels like with Black nationalism, the march of Black nationalism was to build something.
Yes.
That was durable, that was solid. And I think that there was an idea at one point in time that if Black Americans got their act together, that it would have implications for the world at large, for the Black world at large, right? Under the assumption that Black Americans had access to things that if they just got collective and got together, that they could do a lot for places like Haiti and countries that were fighting for their independence or whatnot. But that day never came, where American Blacks actually got themselves together as a center of the Pan-Africanist movement in the world. When I think about, first of all, to build, I want to say this: if you're going to build a nation and you're going to build schools and you're going to build your own system of governing, self-governing, and all those things, you do need people at all levels, right? You need scientists, you need all this stuff,
Absolutely.
Which is why I think, like, Black Panther, the whole Wakanda thing stoked the imagination of many, because it was a fully formed society that was actually superior to the rest of the world and scientifically superior, and was able to protect themselves, right? I mean, that play in that movie was the idea that somebody wanted to come in and take what they had to free the rest of the world. So in some ways, it feels like that was about Black Americans and the rest of African world. But actually, I want to go back to just, you mentioned Marcus Garvey. Feels like in Black history and Black intellectual thought, there's been a contest between, are you Malcolm, are you Martin? And Sharif El-Mekki likes to remind me, yeah, but there's also Marcus Garvey. Don't act like there's just two of anything. There's three and there's four and there's five and there's others. When you think about W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, who do you think actually came out ahead in the contest, and to what effect?
Well, I would say that if we are assessing them not based upon their notoriety, but based upon the correctness of their analysis, then hands down it would be Marcus Garvey. I think that Du Bois is upheld, as the preeminent scholar, of the 20th century, and I think that it requires us, even us Garveyites, right, to read and learn from Du Bois. But one thing that you'll find, and any scholar of Du Bois will tell you this, is Du Bois has his, there's some issues that he remains consistent on, but you'll also find him just throughout his journey, pretty much taking every side of every issue throughout his journey. So there's some marked confusion with Du Bois, but what I think society tries to do is they try to lock Du Bois at 1903, Du Bois from Souls of Black Folk. And they don't, Du Bois from 1903 to 1965, you see evolution, you see a change in thought, especially during the Great Depression. Du Bois's writings during the Great Depression, where he is calling for Black separatism as a means of economic defense, is very, very interesting, because he sees a moment similar to the moment that we are approaching as a people. Okay, so you pulled up one of the articles that he was writing.
Yeah, this is 1935,
So
Uh,
Du Bois writes a series of articles on separation, uh, uh, leading up, and this is during when the Great Depression occurs, essentially. But the final article that he writes, and this is before he essentially resigns from um, the NAACP, is an article called "A Nation Within a Nation," where he's basically just throwing off, you know, all hopes for any plan of integration, and he's basically arguing that the so-called talented tenth, or the civilized Negroes among us who have approached some form of European culture or civilization or education, who their role was supposedly to uplift the backwards masses of Black people. He's saying that those people have sold out Black people, and they have left the masses of Black people to sink, suffer, and die. This is what Du Bois is arguing. But is what's very, very interesting is you see that during this period, they end up writing Du Bois off as just a crazy old man. In fact, they begin to insult him by referring to him as a latter day Booker T. Washington. This is the way these are the words they use to insult him rather. And he writes about this in his autobiography, Dust Till Dawn. It's a chapter called Revolution, and he writes about this experience in this chapter. He talks about his naivete and thinking that the white people who were funding the NAACP, and these are his words. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm being true to his words. He's speaking to his naivete and thinking that the white people who were funding the NAACP would embrace his program for economic defense. In fact, there's a book that I have back here, and it's called the Negro During the Great Depression, and it talks about this period in the NAACP. I wish I could just grab it really quickly. All right, I'll have to, if I can find it, I'll grab it. But oh, here it is, right here. It's a good book right here. It talks about Negroes in the Great Depression, and in this, of course, it deals with several chapters on the NAACP and Du Bois. And if I can just show you really quick, this is Du Bois right here, where he's coming to that conclusion that his belief that white people would essentially his education and propaganda that he was providing to them would prevail upon their consciousness and cause them to act on behalf of the Negro.
mm-hmm.
He reaches this conclusion during the Great Depression that was just very silly and naive of him. So I'll read it really quick. It says, Du Bois believed on the whole segregation and discrimination were more firmly entrenched in the 1930s than they had been when he began his work for racial betterment. Consequently, Du Bois concluded that his earlier belief that America would yield to clear reason and determined agitation had been naive and mistaken. On the contrary, and now they're quoting Du Bois, it says, to some extent, the very agitation carried on in these years has solidified the opposition, and he concluded that it was not feasible to look for salvation from whites. So as far as they were, and this is Du Bois's quote again, so as far as they were ignorant of the results of race prejudice we had toward them, there can be no doubt that Americans know the facts, and yet they remain for the most part indifferent and unmoved, right? So this is Du Bois reaching this conclusion that pushes him towards essentially Black nationalism.
What year is that?
This is, I don't know
Or
the exact
what
year.
about time?
This is the Great Depression. This is
the Great Depression. Okay.
Yeah, this is Negroes in the Great Depression. So of course it deals with. So to answer your original question, what it took for a crisis for Du Bois to reach, Garvey and even Booker T. Washington before had already reached that conclusion. Right. So you have to remember, Du Bois is coming from, New England. He's not born into slavery. He has to come south to experience what Booker T. Washington so-called was born into. Right. So you see this like in the Litany of Atlanta, where during the Atlanta race riots, and Du Bois is writing this poem, and he's talking about white people. He's like, "Who raised these devils?" This is Du Bois,
Yeah.
based upon what he saw. He's like, "Who birthed and nourished and milked these devils?" This is Du Bois, his writing, and you see the next year, 1907. Du Bois is writing to the German counselor asking for land in Africa. And this is in 1907. I have the letter. I have a copy of the letter, but he's writing to the German counselor. This is before World War I, to request land in Africa and in the German colonies, so that Black people in America could leave and go to Africa. And this is just not in 1907. In 1917, they circle back after World War I, and now they're asking the U.S. government, because Du Bois writes this article called "Close Ranks," where he's telling Black people, hey, be loyal to the government, and hopes that there's going to be some benefit after the war. After the war, right? So after the war, and Germany has lost, and their land has been taken from them. You see Du Bois now going back to the U.S. government, like, hey, by the way, that land we asked the Germans for in Africa, how about y'all give that to us? As for what we did to help y'all in the war. And why are they asking for this land? They're asking for it because Black people are being terrorized, and that point of terror is something that that is the terror dome, so to speak, is something that will be our children's future if we don't, do a detour and take another route. Because if we stay on the track that we're on, that's what we're headed to. And that's where you see folks like Dr. Derek Bell in 1992, when he writes this book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, and he starts with the premise that racism is permanent.
Yes.
Right. So that's something that's the conclusion, essentially, that it took Du Bois 30 years to reach, from 1903 to the Great Depression. He said, "Oh, I've been trying to educate them," because what Du Bois does is in 1899, he writes this study called The Philadelphia Negro, because the Black people at the University of Pennsylvania, I mean, not the Black people, the people at the university.
Let me back up just for a second, too. I want to bookmark this one part. So you say it took Du Bois about 30 years to come to that conclusion.
Yes.
Right? And then you mentioned Derek Bell. So in 92, you're right with Derek Bell. It took Derek Bell longer than 30 years to reach that same conclusion. He was part of the 1954, post-1954 Thurgood Marshall Club.
Yes.
And that was a group of talented 10th individuals who put all of their stock in, like you just said, Du Bois did, pleading with the government for something. And the something they were pleading for wasn't something that we would own, something of ourselves. It was to integrate into what existed. And by 92, Derek Bell said, listen, I've been working with the government for all these years to try these cases. And these cases have proven to me that no matter how you try to approach it, it will beat you. Like it is not trying to get to the point where Brown was trying to get us to, which I think is really interesting. If you think about our talented 10th today, they are still in the Thurgood Marshall camp. They're still in the Du Bois camp. They're still in the pre-54 Du Bois camp, the pre-30 Du Bois camp.
Let me tell you a secret about our so-called talented 10th, or the Black people that get trotted out in front of us as the intelligentsia, so to speak. They have mastered the ability to make delusion look like wisdom. These folks, they know that what they are trying to solve, right? They know that white supremacy essentially is not reformable, but the role that they play is they get to attain a sense of comfort within the plantation system by selling the lie to the masses that white supremacy can be reformed. If you just vote a little bit harder, if you just hold out a little bit longer, eventually we can reform this thing.
Okay, so this puts you on the hook right now. This puts you on the hook, brother, to name names. So so when we think about that, where do you place, say, Cornel West in that?
I place Cornel West firmly in that tradition, and believing that white supremacy and white people essentially can be reformed,
overcome. What about Dyson, Dr. Dyson?
I want to be nice. I want to.
I
I
think
want
that's the answer right there.
yeah, I want to be nice, but yeah, I mean, everybody. So you have to remember when we talk about the Afrocentric movement, the Afrocentric movement is an outgrowth of the Black Studies movement. The Black Studies movement is a branch of the Black Power or Black Nationalist movement, where in 1968, Dr. Clark and other scholars go onto campus and say, okay, now, you know, the riots that are happening in the street are one part of the movement, but now we need to go onto campus and to do battle with their scholars and attack the bedrock of white supremacy. That movement that starts in 1968, referred to formally as the Black Studies movement, it develops and evolves to what becomes the Afrocentric and or African-centered movement coming, you know, the 80s through the about the mid 90s. 94 is where it reaches its high watermark. In response to that particular movement, the state and or the European establishment seeks to create another movement to counteract that legitimate movement of Black studies, right? So what they do in 1989 is they take this dude who has no attachment to the movement, has no attachment to the community, has no attachment to Black studies, and they says, this guy is the new face and leader of Black studies. And this is, they write an article in the New York Times called 1989, and it's called Meet Skip Gates, the new face of Black studies, where they're celebrating him. They're talking about him and his Mercedes Benz and his phone in his car, and he's like more of a mogul than a teacher. So Skip Gates becomes the new model. So that, you know, corrupted tree, Skip Gates is the roots of that. But what grows out of that is you get your Cornel West, you get your Mike Dysons, you get your Mark Lamont Hills, you get your Melissa Harris, all the folks that are accommodationists of white supremacy today that they trot out, you know, in the liberal media to speak for Black people, they all come from that tree. In
Okay, so
1990,
is Skip Gates connected to, is that Lewis Gates?
Henry Louis Gates.
And they call him Skip. That's his.
Yeah,
That's his.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So he became the voice of Black studies in the late 80s.
Yes. In
Somebody put up
1989, the New York Times puts out an article like "Meet the New Face of Black Studies," Henry Louis Gates. And this is they are attempting to throw these Black studies guys under the bus, because remember, at this time, what's happening is there's this significant conflict between the Black community and the Jewish community, because the Black community is saying, ho, 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 there's a relationship that exists historically between these two communities, and it hasn't always been a pleasant one. And, you know, there are claims of anti-Semitism, so folks like, you know, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, folks like Dr. Tony Martin, you know, yeah. So this is a serious moment in our history, and in fact, what allows Skip Gates to come to prominence is they send him out to attack that movement. So he attacks John Henry Clark. He writes this article called, you know, Demagogues and things like that, where it's attacking the Afrocentric and the nationalist movement. He writes this article, I think, in like 92. I don't remember exactly when he writes it, but it's during this time period, right? So there's this very hot contested battle that's happening. Yeah, that's the article, Black Studies New Star, where they're talking about Skip Gates. I said 89, apology, it was in 1990. I was a year off. But
wow,
essentially they send Skip Gates out to attack he attacks John Henry Clark and attacks the Afrocentric and African-centered movement. But again, the folks that you're pointing to today, like Cornel West, they all have their origin in that particular vein, right? They are a created population of scholars in order to destroy the organic. A scholar who calls this out, but who's also very critical of the Afrocentric movement, is Dr. Adolph Reed at the University of Pennsylvania. In 1994, he writes an essay called "What Are the Drums Saying, Booker?" And this is a great essay if you haven't read it, where he calls out by name. He calls out Dyson, he calls out West, he calls out Gates, he calls out Bell Hooks. Like, he calls them, as he says, essentially what they're doing is modern minstrelsy, right? And he said, for those of us who, a minstrel show is anathema to us, like we can't stomach seeing what they, have trotted these black people out to be. So
Well, let me ask you about this. Now you can really help me because you pushing this few buttons here with names. Somebody in the comments said, Brother Omowale doesn't talk about people, but I'm not asking you to talk about people because what we're really talking about are strains of Black thought that I feel like are in contest with each other. And you just talked about one of the contests. There was a Black Studies movement, and then somebody creates a alternative Black Studies movement to be the leader of a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to counteract it. That's a contest to me. That happens, and it's going to happen again. And if we don't know who fits, you just did a very good job of educating who fits within which strain of Black thought, like where they came from, what stream they came out of, I think is important. But you just mentioned Adolph Reed. Now, when was this article that you said he wrote?
He wrote it in 1994. It's called
Okay,
What Are the Drums? Yeah, What Are the Drums Saying, Booker?
So now he is on something totally different. Now he's on some post-racial class essentialism thing, in my mind, and he's actually a critic of race as a gravity, like race as a deciding factor. Mm-hmm. What happens then? I mean, what happens there? Because now he's on some post-racial Bernie. It's not about race; it's about class.
I think I think that when you're grounded kind of like in a Marxist ideology, I think that that's a logical conclusion. I think that that's a natural train of thought in terms of where you depart from in your origin of thought. Like that's a natural destination to arrive at. That race essentialism, so to speak, is something that is non-necessary, as a way of understanding how the world is organized. That completely goes against and again, we can. So the roots of that tree that you're referring to now, you're referring to the split, between the nationalists or the Garveyites and the Black left, right? That goes back to the early 20th century as well, where you have like the African Blood Brothers, who in many ways were an auxiliary group of Communist Party USA. So you get folks like Cyril Briggs who are attacking Garvey, right? In 1920, we're talking about the RBG Centennial Conference. I don't know if we'll have a chance to plug that in here, but in 1920, where Garvey throws the first international convention of Negro peoples of the world, it's in New York. It's convened from the August 1st through August the 31st. They sign the Declaration of Rights of Negro people of the world. They embrace the colors red, black, and green as the national symbol of race pride. They have more than 25,000 people at a sold-out Madison Square Garden event on the 13th of August. During that particular event, you have 2,000 UNIA delegates from more than 22 different countries present at that event. This is in 1920. So in 1921, they try to do the second convention, and not try, they do the second convention, but the African Blood Brothers attempt to wage a coup to essentially siphon off some of the energy from the Garvey movement into the communist movement. So there's this whole history there on the Black left where, like, the early folks on the Black left, they came in, they were excited because I think people were excited at the prospects for what a communist victory or a class victory could mean if they were true to their words, right? If this could really mean the creation of a okay, I don't want to go too far off on a tangent. I'll just say this. I think that people were excited for the prospects of working hand in hand with white people to achieve liberty, and they thought that their chances may be greater by working with the white folks, the masses, right, of poor workers to achieve the liberation as they saw it, right? So I think that that's what causes that split. But you see, like the first generation of young people who embrace, communism, like by the time World War II comes around, like you see people like I can't even think of names right now, but that young group, they are completely disheartened with the Communist Party and with the left because they feel a sense of betrayal. You understand? Like, and they recognize, like, oh, these people were really just like using us for our movement, right? So they're completely just disheartened by it. In fact, Du Bois, I don't know if this is in the 40s, but he writes an article called Socialism in the Negro, or Socialism in the Negro Problem. And he's essentially arguing that the racism of white people will never allow socialism to benefit black people, right? He's arguing that,
Wait a second. This is Du Bois?
yeah, this is Du Bois. And that's what I said.
Really?
Du Bois, he's on every side of every issue. He writes an essay. It's called Socialism in the Negro. He's arguing in this essay that white people are trying to figure out, is it possible to have a socialist society in a way that it benefits everybody except black people? He's saying, and if we can have that society, then white people would be completely okay with socialism. So that's what Du Bois is always arguing for.
And that's a long time ago. So he's actually saying he's saying the exact opposite of what Adolph Reed and Adolph Reed's son, Toure, are saying today. What they're basically saying is the exact opposite, is that socialism is the only way to get to full equality, because it serves everybody equally well. It means that you distribute everything, and then everybody, like it would, they say that it would disproportionately help black people if you took up their Bernie agenda, basically.
Yeah,
and look at this thing right here. This is Reed, Anti-Racism, a neoliberal alternative to a left. And in this, he's like discounting Derek Bell and others for being on the race thing, right?
Yeah.
Because he's a class reductionist. Like, it all reduces to class for him now. And when you talk about the minstrels that show up on different sides of this thing, you got on one side, you've got Lowry and Candace Owens at a very crude extreme, and Diamond and Silk, and then others that are the scholarly equivalent of them. And then the left produces their own version of that to get you out of seeing. They want you to.
It's very interesting that you bring that up, because it shows that the first wave of minstrels feel as though they have to compete with this new wave of non-intellectual minstrels that are out here talking from. So by non-intellectual, I'm talking about your Candace Owens, because not only has Mark Lamont Hill sat on the stage and felt as though he had to contend with her.
That was a weird interview.
Dyson also sat next to her. So it makes me look at them as like, you make yourself out to be a joke. Now, they won't sit with somebody like me. Right? Because I don't have the notoriety or the following that a Candace Owens has. But so they won't sit across and engage with somebody who's coming from that organic tradition of black radicalism, right? People try to hijack black radicalism and make it like, oh, it's just about the black left. But our radical tradition goes far beyond the early 20th century. Come on now, that's silliness to make it appear as though the black radical tradition is something that emerges out of the 20s with like the black out of the 20th century with the black left. The black radical tradition is a tradition of resistance, right, to white domination, and by and large, the long history of this resistance has been based upon the principles of race. But I guess, the black left are now arguing from a more scientific approach. Okay. I'm getting some feedback here.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, you're good, brother. You're good. I'm sorry. I lost my train of thought. I apologize. Your initial question, though, you asked in terms of.
I was just basically saying we create minstrels on all sides. I made an analogy in a previous conversation. I don't know if it was this week or if it was last week, where I said white supremacy is a bird with two wings, a left wing and a right wing, and it's Absolutely. The same bird. The more the wings flap, the more the bird stays in flight, right?
Yeah, yes.
And you up here being bought off on the idea that your particular wing of white supremacy is the good one, right? Yeah. And you're not paying attention to the physics of how when they flap together, the middle bird stays in flight, keeps going, right? So you picking one wing to sit on. So one side is going to give you Herman Cain, and is going to give you Candace Owens, and is going to give you Thomas Sowell, and is going to give you let's just keep going down the line. You could probably make a long list, but I think what many black people, because they're presumed to be all on the left, assume is that's all on the right side. That's not
Yeah.
on the left side. So they're not going to call out on, you just called out some, I don't know if you would consider them left or just centrist, you know, like some of the
I think the left would be offended if I don't want to offend the black left, because I think that there's just enough offense to go around, but I think that they would be offended by me referring to the Dyson and West and folks like that as the black left. I think that, yeah, you could call them centrist, so to speak.
Okay, we'll call
I
them
think
centrist, but Adolph
Mark
Reed,
Hill,
though,
he speaks out of both sides of his mouth a little bit. So
I think he's totally a centrist. He's like completely like in the middle, but Reed isn't. Reed is very much
no. Reed
you know,
is absolutely on the black left.
on the left, and he's on the multicultural class reductionism left, which basically looks at the Derek Bell's Afrocentricism as pipe dreams that don't, you know, his main thing that I've seen him recently, and I've been studying him over the last week, is really that you're immature until you understand that the economics is everything. It's really not the race thing.
Yeah, so let's understand economics, right? When people talk about you know, the means of production. The means of production are simply two things: is land and people, because from those two means everything is produced, right? So the fundamental issue that we are dealing with is that of conquest. The land has been taken from a group of people, right? So you're okay with the land being maintained in the way that it's being maintained. What you're arguing for is, okay, we accept this plantation system, but let's reform it so that, you know, essentially the output, the profit, is shared amongst a wider amount of people. Right. So that's what, you know, Reed and folks like that are looking for. I argue it all the time. Like, their goal is to capture the state, right, to so that they can redistribute the wealth of the land. The goal of the nationalists is to capture the land so that they can build a state upon which the wealth is distributed in a manner that's based upon their own values. These are two different objectives. We're trying to recapture the land that has been stolen. You're trying to capture the state, right? So that, okay, now that I have this state, and it's a silly thing to think that you can capture the state along with white people, and they'll, like, it just flies in the face of history. Du Bois writes in 1897 or 1898, he writes something called The Conservation of Races, where he argues that that race is the fundamental understanding of all history, and those who seek to override this particular understanding, I'm screwing up his quote. I wish I could just pull it up for you, but it's in 1897. He writes conservation of races, a conservation of race. You can go find it for yourself. But even you get Alain Locke, who comes after Du Bois, and he says that, yeah, race is a social construct, but it's also needed if we're serious about defending ourselves from white racism in terms of how we organize ourselves and protect ourselves. You understand what I'm saying? So
and they're still arguing that today, that race is just a social construct. So why talk about it?
A lot of things are social constructs, but they
what I like to
our
point
lives
out
in a real concrete way.
This is my problem with Reed and with the Bernie side of things, is they say you're in a fantasy land if you're talking about something that doesn't exist. Well, race doesn't exist scientifically. It's just a social construct. So why talk about something that doesn't exist? But they're missing a part of the sentence. It's a social construct with material consequences.
Yes.
Right. So that material consequences part of the sentence is the part that ruins the rest of their sentence. Right. Yeah. Because there are, like, you get pulled over at the middle of the night and you're having to think through what your interaction is about to be with the state's agent, which is a police officer. You don't open your window and say, now, officer, race is just a construct now. And when you got a knee on your neck and you're dying, you don't say, but, listen, bro, race is it's a construct.
Yeah.
No,
the
consequence.
The problem with their entire analysis is they fundamentally do not understand race, nor do they understand racism. In fact, there's an excellent quote from what's this brother's name? He wrote The Compensatory Code of Neely Fuller. Neely Fuller Jr. says, if you don't understand racism, white supremacy, everything that you think you understand will only confuse you. So, you're dealing with a lot of confused Black people. The confusion is definitely the watchword of the day. And you're also dealing with a lot of elitism, folks in the academy, they're not going to have an exchange with somebody like me because, oh, he doesn't have the credentials. Like, who is this guy? But they'll talk about people like me who've done things in history. And what do I mean by that? They'll talk about folks who were organic grassroots organizers who were working to address the problems that we face as a people. Right? They'll spend all of their time in the classroom talking about people who did the work, but the people who and their contemporaries who are doing the work, they will never invite into their classrooms. In fact, they're very elitist. And you get that even from people who call themselves Pan-Africanists and nationalists, but they're chairs of Africana studies departments. But that elitism is there, and I experience it all the time. But I'm okay with that. I'm connected to our people. I'm connected, to our movement and to our struggle. So their elitism is going to be what it's going to be, but it's not going to stop someone like me from doing the work that needs to be done.
So I'm going to because I know we got to wrap soon. I'm going to take us back to the first question, which I think we answered. Like if I were to ask the question that I asked in the beginning, do Black children need Afrocentric education to succeed? I think you did a great job of saying, first of all, here's the definition of what succeed is. And succeeding is preparing people for self-determination. In my mind, I like to think of it as we use the word freedom a lot, liberty and freedom in the United States. And I think Martin Luther King and others were looking to make the country live up to its promise and its ideals. I don't necessarily believe that that's the same thing as making it live up to the thing it talks about all the time, freedom. What does freedom really look like? What does liberty really look like? And in the Black context, it looks a little bit different than it looks for everybody else. So if you're preparing people for self-determination, you have to educate them for freedom. You have to educate them for self-determination. You raise free people. You don't just expect that they just come, walking along one day and wake up and no. So the whole stay woke thing is, no, you got to be born before you're woke, right? So you got to raise free people. And that's what we're attempting to do. But all of this, since we answered that question, we got a few minutes here left. You have an upcoming, a big upcoming educational event, yes. And I call it educational because it's the ability to educate the public on these things. A lot of speakers, a lot of content. So tell us what is coming up. Let's unpack this a little bit about this opportunity for folks to learn more.
Yeah, we have the RBG Centennial Conference, which is going to be held virtually August the 8th and the 9th. You can really find out all the information about it on the website, which is RBG Centennial, spelled CENTENNIAL.com. It's a 2-day event. Day 1 is going to be focused on the last 100 years. Day 2 is going to be focused on the next 100 years. But the event is meant to commemorate the first International Convention of the Negro Peoples of the World, which was held in August of 1920. During that convention, 54 articles were declared in what's referred to as the Declaration of Rights of Negro Peoples of the World. Article 39 stated that the colors of our race, the colors of Black people, would be the colors red, black, and green. So this 2-day convention is meant to honor that moment, examine the past 100 years and the movements that came out of them, as well as the lessons we learned from those movements, and prepare ourselves for the next 100 years. The theme for the conference is Garveyism and the renewed cry for African nationhood. So it's heavily focused on nation, but on day 1, we have Dr. Julius Garvey, who's Marcus Garvey's youngest son. We have him speaking. We have a panel on education for self-determination. We also have a panel with our Black political prisoners. So we have Janine Africa from the Move 9, Daruba Ben Wahad from the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, and also Baba Sekou Odenga from the Black Liberation, the Black Party, Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army. So that's day 1. But please, I don't have the time to give you all the details, but we're definitely looking for support. One of the things that I was lamenting with my brother before we got on this was when Juneteenth was celebrated in the wake of, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, when the corporations and white society said it was okay to celebrate Juneteenth, Black people all over this country celebrated Juneteenth. But now we have an event that is monumental, represents a milestone in our development as a people. And there's no excitement about it, even from those who wave the red, black, and green colors. Like, they have no excitement or even no knowledge of the fact that this represents the centennial year. So please do join us. The website is rbgcentennial.com.
All right. And I lifted it up here online. I put the link into the comments. I think, I think this is an important learning opportunity. So I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate you coming on today. I'm going to, so y'all didn't give any exact ticket prices. It's a
Oh, the
$0 to
ticket.
$50. So
No, the ticket. If you click on tickets, it's
yeah,
there. So
yeah.
the
It
early
says
bird.
0 to 50.
Yeah, you have to click on tickets, and it
Oh,
gives you,
okay.
because there's multiple tickets.
There's multiple layers.
So,
Okay, gotcha.
so there's
Okay.
a free ticket. There's a ticket for $35 and that's the early bird price. It gets you access to both days, but that includes the breakout sessions. So we have 5 private breakout sessions where you have 50 people speaking during those 5 sessions.
All right. So the top tier is so there's different tiers. I'm looking at it right now, different levels from free all the way. So no one has any excuse to this. It's like everybody can make something happen. Listen, I'm gonna buy. So there's the $50 ticket is a main room and breakout sessions. It's everything. It's the full.
Yeah, but that's
so.
that's the price after early bird.
After
So
early bird. Okay.
yeah, that ticket isn't for sale until after the first. So right now, if you buy that ticket, it'll be $35.
Okay. So what I'm offering to do here is to buy 3 of those tickets. So, and I'm hoping that people in the comments are going to match me. So all you who like to come here every day and think about Afrocentric education and think about what we do to raise free people and to improve the lives of Black children, especially that 8 million that we are always focused on, match me, fight me on this. Pull out your checkbooks, fight me. So we're going to do 3 tickets. I would love to see who else. Let me know. Shoot me an email to let me know if you're going to do it or not, if you're doing it, because I would just love to see who's doing it. And you can reach me at Christopher at activist.com. Christopher at activist.com. Walk the walk, folks. Don't just talk the talk. Walk the walk. Invest money. There's no way in a capitalist society to show what you support basically by what you give money to. So give money to this, lay off the Starbucks for a few days here and make something real happen. Brother Omowale, thank you so much. I appreciate you, man. This has been like a learning opportunity for me. You gave me like 80 things that I'm gonna like have to have a bunch of tabs open on my Chrome on my Chrome tabs. But I appreciate you, man. And I appreciate all that you're doing to educate folks.
I appreciate you too, brother. And thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. So everybody watching, please go out, support it. The link is in the comments. Support this upcoming Centennial event, the RBG Centennial Conference. It's August 8th through 9th. That's 2020 on Saturday, August 8th. It starts at 10 a.m. And you should go get tickets right now. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate all that you bring every day. The comments were great this morning, as they always are, and we had a lot of people watching. So I thank you all for coming.